Hello and welcome back to the Villa Filler podcast. I'm back again, as always, with my good friend Dan Moisman. Dan, it's good to be reunited, mate. You've been doing God's work, and how are you doing, mate? Because it's been a fairly busy day, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has, mate. It has. It's a bloody pain having a club that's so efficient, isn't it?
It is.
You know what I mean? Like when
Yeah.
you see all these clubs like Man United, for example, where there's leagues all over the place and everything takes months to happen, and you know about it 4 weeks in advance. Obviously, it's terrible from a PR point of view. But I imagine for all of those United YouTubers and podcasters, it makes life really, really easy. Literally, I'd barely even open my eyes this morning, sleepy-eyed, coming into my laptop, working from home, bust open the laptop lid, and boom, Christian Perslow's gone. Absolutely no pretext to that whatsoever. No sign that it was going to happen. And you're like, oh my God. And then literally since then, today has just gone crazy.
It was a long statement. I mean, obviously, it didn't really end on bad terms, but it's a longer statement than we're used to, and it kind of reads that he was sort of asked to leave, and this is how we sort of, everybody saves face here. You're not fired, but we've got somebody who's obviously coming in, who we'll get onto in Monchi. And I mean, I think where this all really sort of stems from, I think the origin of this, or the sort of the start of Christian Perslow's sort of downfall, if we can call it that. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic there, but the moment Unai Emery was announced as Aston Villa manager, who is posed in the photo with him other than Nassef Sawiris? And with Steven Gerrard, obviously we had Christian Purslow front and centre, but this time it was all Nassef who was sort of not hogging the limelight, because of course Unai is the limelight, but he was a part of that moment. So I think, first of all, not seeing Purslow there was quite interesting. And obviously we spoke about Chris Heck probably about a month and a half ago now, mate. And It kind of sounds like, I think with wanting a new director of football, or a director of football, because I don't think Langer ever really was that, was he? And then bringing in Chris Heck to run the business side, and sort of knowing what we know about Purslow spinning both plates, which is ridiculous for anybody to do, really. I don't think there's anyone in world football that can run both the financial and the sort of footballing side of it well, anyway. Then it kind of almost made Purslow redundant in a way, didn't it, I guess, mate?
Yeah, this is really interesting, and the news has, it's all moved so fast, as you rightly say. But both you and I took one look at this morning and went, "Oh,
yeah,
don't know how I feel about that," because Purslow, until Unai Emery, has been so front and center of everything, whether you like it or not. There are parts of that which I have liked. I know that it sort of became a bit of a running joke, his sort of message to the fans after Jack left. But I think that transparency, whether it was executed correctly, I do inherently believe that's a good thing. And I think spelling out to the fans, okay, this has happened. We understand what it means. Here's why we did it. Here's what we're going to try and do. I think ultimately that's a good thing. And I kind of feel the same way towards Dr. Tony, although he was a very bad thing for the football club.
Yeah.
Like the way that he tried to break down the barriers that had never been broken down before with the fans. And although it was oddly cryptic, I think that's a good thing, because we have everything goes on behind a wall at a football club that we either have to guess what's going on or just never see.
Yeah.
You have what happens on the pitch, but then once you get past the dugout and you start going upstairs, it's blackout. You never know anything. And so I think ultimately it's a good thing, whether it came out of ego or not. You have to sort of look at Purslow as somebody that's clearly very highly respected within the Premier League. Henry Winter put out a really interesting tweet, actually, that said how much he will be missed by the Premier League, how he stood up to the bullies in there, those that wanted the Super League, those that had no respect for the English footballing pyramid or for the national team. He cited Christian Purslow and Brighton's Paul Barber as the only two voices of reason and balance in the Premier League room, which is a pretty glowing report, really. And look, like, I think obviously people will hold opinions of Christian Purslow mainly based around sort of that whole limelight thing and how much he loved that.
Yeah.
But there are a pretty significant trail of breadcrumbs of good things that he's done from the football club. And at the very least, mate, if you zoom all the way out and you look at it, we were bottom half of the championship when he came in 2018, and as pretty much the top dog of Villa Park, he has overseen this rise to where we sit now in Europe and 7th in the Premier League. And regardless of what you think about the man on a personal level, you can't really argue with that, can you?
No, I think that's the thing as well, like sort of context and the sort of the wider lens, as you say, mate, is what's needed, because it feels like when things go right, and it's the same for everybody, right? It's the same for any team, any fandom, whatever. When something goes wrong, people need a finger to point. And when everything was going wrong, it was either Johan Langer's fault or Christian Perslow's fault. And it felt easy for fans to sort of point the finger at those two guys, because they're the ones who we sort of see as the decision makers, right? But I think the only time Purslow really dropped the ball was in a point in Gerrard. And I think that obviously does sort of reflect worse on him, knowing that there is somewhat of a personal relationship from his time at Liverpool and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, for all the Liverpool fans who were like, oh, we warned you about Christian Purslow, well, it was never actually that bad, really. I think maybe season ticket prices as well, you could argue, is sort of Purslow and the club sort of dropping the ball there. But as you say, mate, he's overseen huge steps of progression. You know, even with, I know the gambling deal with BK8 is a very sketchy one, and the company has sort of very seedy and misogynistic ties, which shouldn't be glossed over, but it is the largest shirt sponsorship deal that the club has obtained in the history of its existence. And again, maybe that's not a thing to celebrate, but he's doing his job. That is quite literally his job. So, you know, there is that. And yeah, ultimately, I think, you know, marred by the Steven Gerrard era. And I think, you know, there will be Dean Smith apologists that probably won't forgive Purslow, but that's just the nature of loving someone and being attached to them, I guess. But it's interesting, mate. And obviously with Monchi on, you know, the horizon, it could literally happen while we're recording this, because there was a board meeting at Sevilla today, which you know, he was sort of vox popped by the news, and they asked why he wasn't there, and he said, well, I wasn't invited, and he's been photographed leaving the stadium and all this kind of stuff. It seems to have really accelerated. When we were talking about Matteo Almani, mate, I was never convinced by that, as like, not like I didn't want him. I just felt I felt the whole situation was weird, and obviously we all know how that panned out, right? You know, he clearly used this for leverage and to get Jordi Cruyff out of the club. This makes way more sense, just given the fact that there is and has been a working relationship between Unai and Monchi, and there is no one better to talk about that than yourself, mate. Again, absolute La Liga aficionado, but this guy's overseen Europa League. He's, you know, facilitated some of the most interesting signings in the league as well, and assembled some great squads in his time. This feels like the move, doesn't it, mate? This is the one. This makes more sense than Almani.
Yeah, this is Monchi has been perhaps not so much recently, because he made that switch to Roma a few years ago from Sevilla, and funnily enough, like, executed a few deals. That one such deal was Robin Olsen and guys like that didn't go to plan. But before that, I don't think it's a controversial statement to say he was one, if not the gold standard for those kind of director of football type roles, based on what he did in Spain across his two spells at Sevilla, as you rightly said, mate. 5 Europa Leagues, 2 UEFA Cups, 2 Spanish Cups, a Spanish Super Cup, and some other titles sprinkled in there too. But it's what he did in that first spell that really sort of elevated him to some quite incredible status around the world, really. He was sort of step up to help oversee Sevilla's youth program at first, helped discover players like Diego Capel, Alberto Moreno, Jesus Navas, Antonio Puerta, Sergio Ramos, Jose Antonio Reyes. And he also created a network of, let's say, about 700, 800 scouts all over the world that were constantly pumping talent into Sevilla that he was either able to keep at the club or to flip for big prices. And then that network continued to churn. There were so many bargains in there, signing the likes of Adriano, Dani Alves, Julio Baptista, Federico Fazio, Seydou Keita, Ivan Rakitic. The list just goes on. Racked up a profit of about 200 million in the transfer market, and the club kept on rising. That's the most incredible thing. So you had this amazing influx of talent coming through, as well as this constant churn as Barcelona and Real Madrid cherry-picked players from Sevilla. And they still went on and won, as I said, 5 Europa Leagues, 2 UEFA Cups, 2 Spanish Cups, a Spanish Super Cup. It's pretty incredible, really. And he left with such a high reputation, went to Roma, didn't quite work out there, wasn't a total disaster. You can see what Roma have gone on to achieve sort of in the latter stages of his tenure there before he went back to Sevilla. But yeah, it's that working relationship that you talk about, mate. Unai's got reportedly a very strong relationship with Monchi. They worked together for about 3 years between 2013 and 2016 when Unai was in the Basque Country. Sorry, not in the Basque Country, but it's one where, yeah, it's all there. It's all there. It seems that this is probably the biggest example we've seen, mate, of us giving Unai the keys. The big thing about Purslow leaving, and there's a great piece in The Athletic that I implore anyone to go and read about Purslow, a really long read from Greg Evans, where he talks about the triangle of power that has existed at Villa for so long, where the coach and the sporting director would report into the CEO, who in turn would report to the owners. And that triangle where you had Unai or Gerrard and Langer reporting directly into Purslow, would then feed back to Nassef and Wes, seems to have been totally pulled apart now. And we are now, it seems like, restructuring everything completely. The only question I have is, where does Monchi fit? That's what I'm interested in, is what does this mean for Johan Langer? Where does he go now? Because it's clear that he's staying, but he occupies what you imagine would be Monchi's role. It's apparently, that piece in The Athletic also suggests that we gave Purslow the chance to stay and assist Villa's move forward, but it was in a slightly decreased role, and he's turned that down. A role that seemingly didn't currently exist in the hierarchy. So yes, Monchi makes a lot of sense. There's plenty of ties there, an amazing track record. But in terms of what his role will be, that's perhaps the most interesting thing.
I feel like I read something, I can't remember if it's Percy or Evans in their pieces, but it had said that, Langer was still fairly highly thought of by Unai's merry men, and would sort of, I don't know. It's interesting how you say. I feel like when you were explaining that restructure, instead of it being a triangle, I envisaged a line, but now I'm thinking it's a triangle, and Unai's at the top of the triangle. I think that's, or maybe everybody is equal in this new system, right? But listen, Monchi, somebody who signed, as you said, Dani Alves, mate, discovered Ivan Rakitic, paid €2.5 million to sign him from Schalke. Ever Banega, what a player! And then even signing some players. He signed some pretty high-profile names for Roma. Nicolo Zaniolo, someone who we've actually been linked with over the past few days, hasn't quite worked out, but there's no denying his talent. Lorenzo Pellegrino, Rick Karsdorp, Alexander Kolarov. Guy's clearly got an eye for talent and knows how to assemble squads. And I think it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it's like, as you mentioned, sort of assembling that scouting network. He can't be everywhere, and no scout can, which is why it's so important to sort of have that network built up. But he clearly has fantastic contacts, mate. Like Justin Cliver obviously signed him on his little spell at Roma as well. Again, hasn't really worked out for him in his career just yet, but again, no doubt in the the sort of the lineage of talent that's in the Clivert DNA. It's going to be interesting to see how he operates, especially, we're making signings without him, right? And we're making signings without, an appointed director of football, which is alarming some people. But, from all the sort of Tillerman's talk, it has sounded like, Unai was key in sort of persuading him to come, sort of in the final hours, was trying to push that one through. But I guess, I think the beauty is in the details of this kind of thing, mate, because obviously I think it was Percy again that reported we were willing to pay £1.7 million in compensation, which isn't his release clause, and it sort of contradicted what the Spanish media said, where it said that we weren't willing to pay anything. But I mean, if Villa go in and throw, the best part of €2 million, £1.7 million at a director of football, I think it just goes to show how serious that we're taking this. And as you say, mate, rightfully so, giving Unai the keys to the kingdom, letting him steer at the wheel. And I guess we can't really assess this until, obviously, for one, it's happened, and two, probably 1 or 2 transfer windows. Then you can really start to assess how good the squad building is and recruitment. Because, we were just talking off air about Tillemans, weren't we? And how it kind of, he was maybe going to Roma, and then it's all of a sudden happened. And I mean, we've missed out on some big players, or are missing out on some big players. When you look at Asensio, looks like he's off to PSG. Ceballos, nothing has really happened there from the last time we spoke about that, mate. So it's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, we know Unai's got clout. We know Unai's got pull. But how much pull, I don't mean it to diminish what Monchi's done, because he is quite clearly one of the GOATs when it comes to sort of what he does. But I'm interested to see how we recruit under this sort of new regime, mate.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting, mate. I think the most alarming thing for me is Villa clearly isn't happy families right now. You think this would be the most, everyone would be singing off the same hymn sheet, and Villa Park would be a great place to be, but it's clearly not. And that's what's worrying me a little bit, is that I think everybody would have said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And yet we are deciding to have a complete upheaval of the upstairs of Villa Park now. Again, like to pull from that piece from Evans, he sort of references the last game of the season against Brighton, where it was a party out on the terraces, but apparently there's a source that he has upstairs at Villa Park, and Evans doesn't miss. He really doesn't. He said the scene around the boardroom at the final game was described as being weird. The very eagle-eyed Villa fans out there noted that Purslow wasn't out on the pitch with Nassef, Wes, and Unai, which potentially, sort of, as you said at the top, mate, leans into the fact that the writing has been on the wall for a little while. You got Chris Heck coming in, and then you have that sort of will he, won't he thing going with Alemany, which, for better or for worse, Villa don't operate like that. We've been saying how well run we are. Like, to have such a public U-turn happen like that is bizarre. And so, yeah, like it's one where I think we're recruiting the right people. And when you look at the pedigree of the people that are coming in, it's hard to have a problem with it, really. Look at what Chris Heck did with the 76ers. Look at what Monchi's done with Sevilla. It's all there, but why now? Like, that's what's interesting. It would be really interesting, given how amazing a journalist Evans is, that you imagine the details will come out eventually about what exactly has been going on at Villa Park, whether it's to do with the success of Unai, and whether that deal for Steven Gerrard and all the negatives that it brought the club, not just on the pitch, but off it as well, in terms of the media, the complete deterioration of the relationship with the fans. It wasn't, in the first season, not necessarily, but in Gerrard's first sort of full season at the club, the negative trajectory, it's really hard to read into, mate. And I'm I like the guys that we're bringing in, but I can't pretend I'm not a little bit concerned that we're having to bring them in, if that makes sense.
It's wackadoodle time, mate. It's wackadoodle time.
It is.
I think the thing is, though, I think this is what's quite stressful. We're clearly trying to get all of our ducks in order, right? And nothing's ever going to be sort of smooth sailing, right? You know, Villa always miss out on transfer targets. Like, that's nothing new, especially when you're sort of shopping in the category that we are trying to now. It just, like, we can't, the only thing that we can control, right, is what happens on the pitch. I say we, I mean Unai. That's the only thing that realistically he has control over is what happens on the training pitch and then what happens in the game. So this sort of period of time now where there's no games, kind of feel a bit helpless because, you know, he can make the calls and he can, you know, try and sign all these players, but until they're sort of holding the shirt at Villa Park and in the squad at pre-season, you know, he's kind of got his hands tied to a certain degree. And I think, like, I feel like maybe we've, I think it's been a humbling experience, you could say, because we're clearly ambitious, and that maybe it is still just within our circle, and we can sort of get away with it, right? Being, well, by our circle, I mean just like Villa fans, because I feel like a lot of other people would just go, oh, you know, yeah, Villa had a good season, Conference League and that. We'll see. We're clearly aiming for higher than that, aren't we? Like, we're clearly aiming to get Europa or Champions League, like, whether that is verbally said or not. So there's going to be a lot of pressure to get these decisions right, because, you know, we could be chatting, mate, in 6 months' time, you know, December time, and things may not be looking too good. And then again, as I mentioned earlier about pointing the finger at Langer and at Purslow, we could be doing the same thing here with Chris Heck and with Monchi, couldn't we? And I think that's the worry, is these things just happen. These are behind the scenes things, right? And as you say, like, kind of getting cucked by Almani, it doesn't really help your image. And I think, but again, as I say, there is literally nothing we can do about that, because we know Villa do their very best to keep these things in private, and you don't know about anything until it's already happened. So I don't know. It's an interesting one, mate. It does feel like, not that, like, I don't listen. People, you know, maybe sort of misread how we're feeling about this. Obviously, I don't think there's anybody more excited about Monchi's arrival than us two. It just doesn't feel right. Not him, just the club, as you say, mate. Something isn't right, and, you know, until we can see the boys on the grass and sort of be distracted by that, I guess nothing will stop that feeling, I guess. Will it? It's almost like, do you not think, somebody said, I saw a tweet, I can't remember who it was from, but they were like, I think it was about Oxlade-Chamberlain, right? Because he's been linked, God knows why. And somebody said this feels very much like a Sherwood signing in that year. And I was like, fuck. Like, the exact same thing could happen. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, like, it won't. But it's that sort of newfound feeling of optimism, and then for it to all potentially go wrong. I don't mean to put a downer on anyone or anything, but it's just like, oh, like, as you say, mate, something just doesn't feel right. It's just a feeling.
No, 100%, mate. I can't pretend I'm totally comfortable with giving Unai the keys. To be honest, like, I'll put it flat out, because of the turnover that you see in managers in the Premier League. And it's one where I'm not saying Unai is going to get sacked or anything like that, but this is a manager that's only been with us for a matter of months. Obviously,
Napoli won him.
Yes, that was going to be what I was going to lead on to. That's all it takes. Look at, you know, Everton had their Unai in Carlo Ancelotti, and all it takes, Real Madrid go, oh yeah, come on, Carlo. And he's like, see ya. And this is not to say Unai will do that. It's not that I don't think Unai is good enough, mate. Watch any of the last 20 fucking podcasts on this channel. You can see how I feel about Unai Emery. I adore the man. But there are many clubs in the world that operate with the manager at the top of the tree. apart from like you could probably argue your Peps do, your Klopps do, but look at what they've earned. Look at how long they've been at those clubs. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. Yeah, I don't really know what more to say on the matter, to be honest with you, mate. It's one where the proof will be in the pudding. But what's interesting with this one, as you sort of say, if this doesn't go right, you have to look at Nassef and Wes. I think, like, if as you say, by Christmas this hasn't gone to plan, this hasn't worked, you can't blame your Purslows anymore. I don't think you can really blame your Monchis, because it doesn't really feel like they're being brought into. It feels, as you say, a bit weird, and you have to, as we did with Gerrard, call out the decision makers, and that'll be the owners this time. So this is the first time I really think we'll get to see their metal tested, really.
It's so brutal out there. I mean, like the fact that we've dismissed Purslow, he's gone. Purslow's gone. After sort of what he has achieved with us at the club, that no one's safe. No one is safe, and that's I'm speaking broadly, and I'm speaking in if, buts, and maybes, and there's nothing is guaranteed in football. I think the best managers have, all they do is their job, which is manage the team. Look at Pep, look at Klopp. They're not handling. Guardiola, after running a session on the grass, isn't running into his office and going, "Fuck, lads, how are we going to combat these 115 charges?" Like, that's not his job. So hopefully, obviously Monchi can get sorted as quickly as possible, and then that's one less thing that Unai has to worry about, because all he should worry about is what happens on the pitch over 90 minutes. But guys, let us know your thoughts on the potential arrival. I mean, we could be back again in another bloody hour or so, because it's probably going to be confirmed. But we just thought we'd do a little update on the situation. And yeah, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe. We've got a link tree in the description with TikTok and Instagram. Check that out. Like the video if you enjoyed, and up the Villa.